Okay, I don't really know how to start here, but welcome to our bonus episode. So, this is our bonus fan fiction read along, reread maybe for you. For us, it's a reread, and we're excited to jump in talking about one of our favorite fan fictions.
Yep.
And that is Stacy. Do you want to introduce it?
That is Take the Money and Run.
Take the
Woo!
Money and Run. Written by thisapplepielife. So great writer. We have mentioned a little bit about this fic already on the podcast in our
Mhm.
little secret study segment. And we are excited because I actually just started recording the podfic. I recorded chapter 1 yesterday.
It's
And
fantastic.
thank you, thank you. Stacy was the first one to get to listen to it. I still have to
Mhm.
give her the updated version because I've
Yep.
added a little
Razzle dazzle. Yeah.
razzle dazzle. That's a good way to put it since then. So let's go ahead and get started with the song for chapter
Yes.
1 because each chapter has a song at the beginning, and the author chose some lyrics for the song. And
Yes.
the song, obviously, for chapter 1 is Take the Money and Run.
Who's
So
that by again?
I wanted to say that Steve Miller Band. S-
Steve Miller Band. They make
Yes.
some fantastic music. I don't know about you, Megan, but I really dig older music from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And
Yes.
my parents obviously grew up during that time. So
Hmm.
music like that, really, really, really good. So that's one thing that's very heavy in this fic is music.
Yes. And I love it when obviously 80s music is great, but these people that lived in the 80s would have been listening to that
Hmm.
music as well, and it some of it, like the 60s and 70s, wouldn't have even been, like, classic rock yet. It would have
Yeah.
been I mean, that's kind of like saying it's 2024 right now,
Dear God.
so
Yeah.
the music from the 90s and the 2000s, right,
You
is
know it's
like
bad when Alanis Morissette is on the oldies station. You're just like,
right.
what? Ugh.
But I've always loved, like, 60s and 70s music. I was obsessed with hippies. I
Mhm.
always wanted to be a hippie for Halloween and,
A true
um
90s kid obsessed with the 60s.
yes, wished that I had been at Woodstock and loved tie-dye.
The 60s one, not the 1999 one. Disclaimer.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So, yeah, great song and great like, it just sets the mood for the whole entire fic. Obviously, there's a really cute moment. So, hopefully, you're listening to this after you've listened to the first chapter of
Mhm.
the fic. That's what we're intending, and we want it to be accessible to people who are reading the fic for the first time. So if you have never read the fic before, we're going to avoid any major spoilers. We
Yeah.
may kind of touch on things that are setting up or foreshadowing for things that are happening later that we notice. But also, it'll be really fun if you're rereading the fic with us
Yes.
because you'll be able to notice those things too.
Mhm.
So, the cute moment when Eddie takes the deal,
Yes.
from the government, and Steve he gets in the car with Steve, and Steve puts the tape in,
Mhm.
and it plays "Take the Money and Run" because that's kind of like the whole the whole fic, like, they've got this money to burn, and it's funny, we'll talk about some of the, like, author's notes, I think, but in the first chapter, they wrote that obviously they don't think that the government would have really given Eddie this big
Mm.
settlement, but to set up for this fic, like,
It
that's what had to
works, yeah.
happen, and it worked.
And I've read a few fics before where there is government hush money because they have to sign NDAs and stuff. And this is probably the better usage because it sets up the story, like you said. And I really like that instead of dwelling on the aftermath of season 4, like Eddie being injured and this and that, it takes place, I believe it picks up in late August, early September
September,
when
yep.
Steve has just dropped Robin off at college. So, all the events of season 4 took place during March. So Eddie is, he's scarred up and stuff, but he's healed now. That the
Yes.
government already has a cover story, that Hopper's back. So they, instead of dwelling on all that stuff, they kind of just pick it right up in September and they go with it and it works
Yeah.
perfectly.
And I think it's realistic because so many fics have them connecting right away and
Mm,
kind of falling for each other right away. And it's really cool how this story, they don't really know how they feel about each other yet. Like the way Steve talks about, like, sometimes Eddie annoys the shit out of me,
yep.
basically. And I think that that would be absolutely accurate. And they're kind of like falling into this, like, companionship
Hmm.
because they're the only ones left, like, Robin's
Yeah.
gone. I don't know that it doesn't mention it in the first chapter where they are, but, like,
The kids have started
the kids
school
have
back up.
started school. I guess Nancy and Jonathan are probably also off at college.
Hmm.
I can't really remember. It'll be easy for me to avoid spoilers because it's been a while since I read this
Exactly.
fic,
There you go.
so I'm experiencing it for the first time.
Which, may I just say, this is basically this podcast friendship started because of this story, because like
Absolutely,
we've
yeah.
mentioned when we met at the Philly Fan Expo, we're going back and forth recommending all these wild fan fictions to each other. And when Megan pitched Take the Money and Run, she was like, it's a road trip fic. And I instantly was hook, line, and sinker.
Yes.
So we can thank this fic for this wonderful, wonderful journey we've been on ourselves.
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
I agree, like, Steve almost feels like he's in limbo right now. He's still working
Mhm.
at Family Video. All the older teens have started college or moved on. The kids are back in school living their own lives because 'cause they're getting bigger, and he kind of feels like a loser just staying in his parents' empty house, and it even talks about him, like, heating up a TV dinner and just sitting all
Mhm.
alone, feeling kinda like, garbage. But like you said, him and Eddie, he's glad he's got Eddie because they've kind of formed this weird friendship. But then other times he's just completely annoyed by him and he can't stand him. And that's what I like because it's realistic, you know?
Yes. And I love Eddie's, like, goal of trying to annoy him as much as
Mhm.
possible to get him to stand with his hands on his hips. Like, that was just so funny, and that's
I
so
love it.
Eddie. Like, that's very realistic for Eddie. I wanted to just highlight, so I highlighted, I think I've talked about on the podcast before that I download fics to my phone and read them
Mhm.
in my books app since I have an iPhone. And that's one thing about that is that's why I had talked about with the epilogue, I was like, "How am I
Mhm.
only halfway through this fic if I have, like, 2 chapters left?" And that was because the epilogue is, like, almost as long as the fic, and we'll definitely focus on, I mean, I'm thinking that we'll do the road trip part and then maybe take a little break and then do the
Yeah.
epilogue. We'll see how that goes. But the first time I read it, I can also highlight things since I read it in the
Nice.
books app. So I figured it would be fun to look back at the things that I highlighted the first
Mhm.
time I read it. So the first line that I highlighted was, "It would definitely be an adventure. Maybe it would even be fun. Or maybe Steve will spend the rest of his life in prison while he maintains that it was a justifiable homicide."
I
It could
actually
really
laughed
go
out
either
loud at
way.
that. I laughed out loud at that when I was listening to you read it. I was like, "Oh my god, that's such a good line. That's
Yeah,
so good."
and it kinda sets up their relationship because, we've said, and I do wanna warn people that it is a slow burn because some
Mhm.
people need to know that it's a slow burn, but it's
It pays
a
off.
great slow burn and
Yeah.
definitely worth it, but it sets up their relationship because it's not always easy, and I can
No.
tell you from experience that being on a road trip with someone, it's not always easy. You're in close quarters, you're having to kind of rely on each other, and
Mhm.
it's it's not all fun and games on a road trip with someone all the time, so, yeah.
I bet. And it especially highlights in this story, without going too far into it, what kind of like polar opposites they are, or at least they start off as, with different interests of what they want to go and check out and how they go about things and stuff. And you kind of have Eddie playfully pushing Steve's buttons to try to get him out of his comfort zone. So it's really, really interesting. But yeah, I've only been on a few road trips to go to horror conventions, and that's about it. I know you went on a road trip for your honeymoon, and how many
Yes, and
states did you hit?
I've been on a bunch of road trips,
Hmm.
so I've driven all over the country. We've been to 40 out of the 50 states
Oh
so
my
far.
God.
So, and that's most of them I've been with my husband, my now
Hmm.
husband, to all of those places. So,
Phew.
I can tell you that it's great and we
Yeah,
love traveling together. We travel together really well, but it's still not
it's not easy.
always
Yeah.
you're not always getting along kind of thing. But I think we went to 18 states on this road trip that we were, and some of them we had already been to also, but like that was the total for this road trip that we were just on. So I was figuring that every time they kind of go through a state, I can kind of mention if I've been there or not.
Oh,
So
cool. I
I
love that.
have I have been to Indiana
Nice.
twice, I at least twice, kind of just driving through sometimes. One time we drove to Chicago, and on the way back from Chicago, we went south first to
Got you.
Indianapolis, stayed the night in Indianapolis, and then came back east, and we actually stayed at this really cool place. I don't know if it's still there when we were in Indianapolis, called the Indy Hostel.
Hmm.
So it was like a hostel, but they had some private rooms, so we didn't like stay at like the bunk beds in the
Yeah.
hostel, but it was a really cool kind of like guest house type place. And then this past trip, we did go through Indiana and we didn't sleep in Indiana. We slept in at an Airbnb just above the Indiana border in Michigan at a horse farm. So it
Okay.
was really a cool challenge for this past road trip because we took Leia, who is our husky puppy. She was
Yep.
about 6 months old at the time. So we had to find Airbnbs,
That are pet
mostly
friendly.
Airbnbs,
Yep.
yes, that were pet friendly. We stayed in one hotel in Fargo,
Oh,
North
I love
Dakota.
that. Oh my God.
um, because I don't know, Fargo is a weird area. And I
Mhm.
guess that, I mean, we could see that on the show.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but it was, there wasn't a lot of Airbnbs, like, around where I wanted to be, so we just stayed at a hotel, and the hotel was fine. But we went to this place in Indiana just out of kind of the blue. So it was this museum we found on this app called Bring Fido. So it's an app you can use to show places that you're allowed to bring your dog.
That's
So
adorable. Oh my
it's
God.
the RV and Motorhome Hall of Fame, and it's a museum of like old RV, all these cool RVs, like
Did you see any
everywhere from like
Winnebagos?
I did. I have a picture. I posted it on my Instagram story while I was
That's
on the trip.
amazing.
And it looked just like the one in the show.
Love
It
that.
wasn't the one in the show, but I think that the Stranger Things people should take that one that they used on the show and put it
Put
in
it
that
there.
museum
Yeah.
because people would go and see it.
Iconic.
But
Come on now.
there was a very similar Winnebago to the one that they had in the show, and there was, like, old Airstreams. It was really cool all the way
Mhm.
up to, like, modern, like, super fancy RVs that you could look at, and you could, like, walk with the dogs all throughout the museum and
That's
stuff.
really cool.
Yeah, so
Man.
it was a cool place. So that was our little stop on the way through Indiana this trip.
Yeah, indies, I've only been for a horror convention like twice. Couldn't really tell you much about it, guys. I know James Dean is buried there, and I had a probably the best cup of coffee in my life at some random diner there. So that's how I remember Indiana. So woo, Indiana.
Nice. I feel like we have, like, the boys going to, like, diners and stuff a lot in
Mm-hmm.
Fix. So
They
that
probably had my cup
tracks.
of coffee, so it's good.
Yes. One other quote that I had highlighted,
Hmm.
the other one that I highlighted from this first chapter, it was from Eddie. "The world is our oyster, the king and his court jester. He bows
Yes.
to Steve at the waist dramatically." I thought that was another good one that kind of, like, sets the mood.
Yep, kinda kicks off this journey that they're about to take, and you
Yeah.
gotta remember, guys, too, it's 1986, so there are no GPSs, there are no smartphones, they use a road atlas and a compass. Man, I don't think I would have survived. Probably between that and can we discuss the list? Steve's
Yeah,
rules.
let's discuss the list. Also, with the compass and the atlas, I thought that those were some other good comedic moments with the compass. He was like, "I borrowed this from Dustin."
Dustin, yep.
Eddie was like, "If that thing starts going haywire, we
We're
are
going in the
going in the
opposite
other
direction.
direction."
Yep.
And then his joke about not being able to read a map,
Oh my god.
and he
Could
was
you
like, "I'm just
imagine?
fucking with you."
I
Like, that
love
was
it.
perfect.
And I love that it's the Beamer too. That's one thing that was very realistic, even though, Steve Harrington comes from money. Throughout the show, he always drove that same Beamer. And from what I remember, it's like an early 80s, like an 82 or an 81 Beamer. And I remember being told before that was an expensive car. And it's just a lovely
Yes.
shade of burgundy. And it's the same car he drives throughout the whole show. So I love that the Beamer almost becomes like this third character 'cause that's where they're
Oh,
sitting
yeah.
99%
Yep.
of the time, it's so cool.
So that comes into play in the epilogue. I didn't
Mhm.
remember that until you just said that with the car. But then also some of the other characters that we saw in this first chapter, we're not going to see them again for a while
Nope.
because the boys are going to be, on their own. But his relationship with Robin is
Yes.
definitely going to be something that is a huge focus in the epilogue, or their relationship with Robin. And also their relationship with Wayne. And I thought it was
Yes.
especially cute that even though they aren't really sure how they feel about each other yet, they're, like,
Mm.
barely friends. Steve is, like, super close with Wayne
Yep.
already, and I thought that was adorable.
And it just speaks volumes of stuff we didn't see that the writers just kinda almost like, showing, like, probably what's already happened. Like, Steve was probably around a lot for Eddie's recovery or, hung around a lot and got to know Wayne, and Wayne seems like this, old school dude that would probably watch football and stuff. He's
Yes.
probably, kinda formed a relationship with Steve over that, and then we get to see classic Steve and Robin, which I love that her parents didn't drop her off. It was Steve because Steve is her emotional support person.
Yeah.
And, those who have been dropped off at college or lived in a dorm or anything like that, it is complete madness.
Oh
You
my
always
gosh.
forget
That was
everything.
very
That was
relatable,
very realistic. Yeah.
realistic. Yeah.
I love
And
that.
I
Yeah.
looked up that, and I'm sure the author did too because
Mhm.
they are very well researched, but, Walmart did come to Indiana in 1980, so
That's amazing.
I'm going for a Walmart run.
Look, I love that he found a mom in the hallway and, like, asked, "What kind of sheets do I need to buy?" And then just the fact that, like, Robin's roommate probably thought he was the clingy high school boyfriend. He's like, "Well, yeah, we had to cling to each other. We're sharing a twin bed." Like,
Yeah, I was
I
gonna
just
fall out on my ass.
really loved that, and it's a little bit of foreshadowing because he's so codependent with Robin at this time that he feels a little lost without her when he comes back to Hawkins, and it's almost like at first he's a little wishy-washy on the idea of going on a road trip, and then he kinda thinks to himself, "Well, the only reason I kept working at Family Video was to be with Robin. She's not around
Right.
anymore.
So, I
So."
can quit.
But, no, I really loved seeing those little hints of those relationships that, like you said, we don't see him for a while?
And Eddie's sad about kind of leaving
Mhm.
because he knows when he comes back, he's not gonna be in the same place, like, because Wayne is about to move into a new trailer with the government kind of hush money type situation, and his stuff is all boxed up, so it's like Eddie had this idea, and it seemed like kind of a random idea that he came up with, but it also seems like he just needed, a change and a
Yeah.
fresh start too, and I mean, I'm all for, like, a road trip as a fresh start
Hell
kind of
yeah.
thing, like, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yes, but let's talk about the rules.
Yes.
And I guess this is a good time for me to mention that when you listen to the podfic, um, I am gonna try to incorporate things that the author has incorporated into their fic that kind of make it that next level.
Yep.
So when there is the list of the rules, I'm definitely gonna incorporate that, and when they cross things off,
Yep.
you'll being crossed off, and that's actually shown in the fic when you read it, and there's a lot of pictures of the map, the atlas, there's other pictures throughout the story, so I'm typically going to use some sort of sound effect. So if you hear a sound effect when you're when you're listening to the podfic, just know like that's where there is some sort of image or media or something
Mhm.
like that. So check that out. Go back to the author's original fic, scroll through, and definitely check out all the images that they included because that kind of takes the experience of reading it to the next level.
Yeah, this was honestly the first, fan fiction I had read on Archive where there were photos uploaded,
Mhm.
and they really they even do their own Photoshop and stuff, and, we'll get more into it as we continue down the road of the story, but the amount of research that they did, you see advertisements, photos of the real tourist attractions they go to, but what I like with Megan, what you're doing is you're kinda adding that razzle-dazzle that the author added to their fic, so you feel a little more
Right.
immersed with the story, guys.
Yeah, and I like with the Podfic medium, you can hear the music that they've
Mhm.
selected to go with that chapter too. So that's really fun. But there's a long list of rules. We're not gonna read them because you've just listened to them, but
Yep.
he does already cross one off.
Yep.
And it's a list of rules for Steve. For Eddie, it's more of a to-do list.
Mhm. He's like, "Okay, I'm gonna end up crossing all these out by the end of the trip," and it's so funny because you see this image in the story repeat itself, and they use it like an actual piece of paper, like, they have to jot down somebody's number at one point, and they write it
Yeah,
on the same piece of paper, and they joke
they
around
write
on
little
it.
notes.
It's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
cute, but I love that chapter 1, right away, 1 rule's already crossed out. Hysterical.
Yeah, no heavy metal, that is already crossed out.
Gone. Yeah.
He sticks that Iron Maiden tape in the tape player,
Mhm.
and we're off to the races, right?
Yep. It's such a good, it's such a good chapter because you really don't know where it's going. You just know that they're starting this adventure, and it's very rarely that when you listen to a podfic or you read a fan fiction that you're instantly roped in. This kind of story does it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, I think so, for sure, too. Um, yeah, so that was chapter 1. I
Chapter
think we hit
one.
everything that we wanted to talk about,
I think
right?
we did. Yeah.
Yeah, so these episodes won't be very long. They might be a little bit longer for the longer chapters or if
Hmm.
we end up talking about more than one chapter, but we are so excited to have you tuning in to this adventure, going on this road trip with us.
Yeah.
And we will hopefully talk to you about chapter 2 in a few days and talk to you then.
All right. Over and out.
Over and out.